The midnight silence inside the massive hangar of the Aerotech National Aviation Academy was broken only by the rhythmic hum of hydraulic pumps and the soft, cool draft of air conditioning. Looming in the center of the bay was Simulator Bay 4, a multi-million-dollar, full-motion flight simulator mounted on massive steel actuators. Its curved cockpit dome gleamed under the overhead high bay lights, replicating the exact flight deck of a commercial jetliner. Beneath the platform, holding a heavy torque wrench and wearing a grease-stained navy blue jumpsuit, was Darius Vance. To the cocky young flight cadets and polished instructors who passed through the facility during the day, Darius was just an aging night maintenance technician. His brass name tag simply read D. Vance, Avionics Maintenance. He worked quietly in the shadows, adjusting hydraulic fluid lines, resoldering fiber optic sensor arrays, and sweeping the hangar floor after hours. His broad shoulders were slouched just enough to avoid drawing attention, but his posture carried the deep, ingrained discipline of a man born for the skies. For over 20 years, Darius Vance had been a legend in military aviation, a decorated Air Force Special Ops Chief, master test pilot, and lead tactical flight instructor. He had flown over 500 successful combat and extraction missions through severe storm systems, hostile airspace, and complete instrument blackouts. 2 years ago, following his quiet retirement from military service, Darius chose to take a low-profile maintenance position at the academy for one simple reason: to watch over his daughter, Aria. Darius wiped a trace of hydraulic oil from his calloused knuckles with a rag, his dark eyes drifting toward the glass-walled observation gallery above the simulator floor. Inside the briefing room sat 22-year-old Aria Vance. Aria wore her sharp white flight cadet uniform, her gold epaulets catching the fluorescent light. She was seated at a console, meticulously reviewing flight charts, wind shear probability maps, and approach vector calculations for her upcoming final evaluation flight. Her dark eyes were sharp and focused, a mirror image of her father's intense determination. A subtle, proud smile flickered across Darius's face. Aria had inherited his innate feeling for the air, earning top marks in aerodynamics and emergency procedures purely through her own relentless work ethic, without ever relying on her father's decorated name. The heavy pneumatic doors at the end of the hangar hissed open. Stepping onto the polished concrete floor was Captain Victor Sterling, the Academy's chief flight evaluator. Sterling was a tall, arrogant man in his late 40s, dressed in a spotless four-stripe captain's uniform. His shoes clicked loudly against the floor as he walked beside his 19-year-old son, Julian, who was also wearing a cadet uniform, though his tie was loose, and his posture slumped with entitled indifference. "I don't care about the meteorological reports, Julian," Sterling was saying in a loud, dismissive voice that echoed off the hangar walls. "The evaluation board wants a smooth demonstration. You follow the automated glide path, let the flight director do the work, and you take the top score in the class." Julian shrugged, checking his smartphone. "Whatever, Dad, as long as I get the turbine rating before the airline recruitment drive next week." "You will," Sterling assured him with a smug grin. "I'm supervising the simulator calibration myself." Sterling's sharp eyes scanned the maintenance floor, locking onto Darius, who was kneeling near the simulator's hydraulic pressure manifold. "Hey, Vance," Sterling called out, his tone dripping with sharp, condescending authority. Darius set his wrench down neatly on his tool mat, stood up smoothly to his full 6'2" height, and looked toward the evaluator. "Good evening, Captain Sterling." Sterling strutted over, resting his hands on his belt, looking up at Darius with open disdain. "Why is Simulator Bay 4 still running on diagnostic mode?" Sterling demanded, tapping his clipboard aggressively against Darius's chest. "My son's practice session starts in 20 minutes. I expect the weather simulation parameters set to clear skies with 0 crosswinds." Darius met Sterling's gaze with calm, unshakable composure. "Bay 4 was scheduled for a full sensor recalibration tonight, sir. The roll axis feedback loop has a 3-millisecond delay. If a cadet encounters simulated atmospheric turbulence, the controls will overcorrect." Sterling let out a bitter scoff. "A 3-millisecond delay? Are you joking? It's a digital trainer, not an F-22 fighter jet. My son doesn't need to fight simulated wind shear. Reset the system to clear weather immediately." "Captain Sterling," Darius replied, his deep baritone quiet and steady as iron, "flight rules dictate that final evaluation practice must include variable wind shear profiles. Cadet Vance is scheduled for her final simulator run at 100 hours. The calibration must be completed according to the FAA manual. Sterling's face flushed red with sudden anger. He stepped closer, leaning up toward Darius's face. "Did a grease monkey just try to quote FAA manuals to me?" Sterling sneered, his voice laced with venom. "Listen to me, old man. You turn screws and wipe up oil leaks. You don't tell a senior airline captain how to run his flight deck. If I want 0 crosswinds for my son, you will program 0 crosswinds." Sterling pointed a manicured finger toward the gallery where Aria was studying. "And as for your daughter," Sterling added with a malicious grin, "she might have top academic scores, but I am the chief evaluator on her final check ride tomorrow. If you waste another minute of my time, I'll personally ensure she fails her emergency procedures check." Darius looked down at the finger hovering inches from his chest. His dark eyes remained calm, but deep within his chest, a lethal, disciplined stillness settled in the cold, unyielding focus of a commander who had faced down storms that tore wings off aircraft. "My daughter knows how to fly, Captain," Darius said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made Sterling involuntarily take half a step back. "She doesn't need clear skies to prove it." Captain Victor Sterling stood on the polished concrete of the hangar, his face burning red under the harsh overhead fluorescent lights. He glared up at Darius Vance, utterly unnerved by the towering maintenance technician's refusal to shrink back. "You watch your mouth, Vance," Sterling spat, his voice echoing sharply off the steel rafters. "You're a line technician on an hourly wage. You don't get to talk about who knows how to fly in my academy." Darius didn't answer with anger. He stood tall, broad shoulders squared, his deep dark eyes resting on Sterling with a calm, penetrating intensity that felt like a physical weight pressing against the evaluator's chest. "Dad?" A clear, steady voice broke the tension. Aria stepped out from the observation gallery stairwell, her white flight suit immaculate, her flight bag slung over her shoulder. She walked over to her father's side, her eyes scanning Sterling with sharp, intelligent composure. "Is there a problem with Simulator Bay 4, Captain Sterling?" Aria asked politely, though her tone left no doubt that she had overheard the exchange. Sterling adjusted the gold cufflinks on his captain's jacket, forcing a cold, condescending smile. "No problem at all, Cadet Vance. Just reminding your father where his duties end. I suggest you get your rest. Your final check ride evaluation is at your 800 tomorrow morning. I'd hate for you to fail because you stayed up late watching maintenance routines." Aria kept her chin up, meeting Sterling's gaze head-on. "I'm fully prepared for tomorrow, sir, regardless of the atmospheric conditions or wind profiles assigned to my flight deck." Julian, who had been lounging against the safety railing while scrolling through his phone, let out a loud, mocking scoff. "Right. Let's see how smart you are when you're actually sitting in the left seat instead of reading textbooks, Vance." Sterling chuckled, turning his back on Darius and Aria as he guided his son toward the simulator's access ramp. "Come along, Julian. Let's load the clear weather approach profiles. Leave the crew to their cleaning." Darius watched them climb the metal stairs to the cockpit hatch of Simulator Bay 4. He gently placed a hand on Aria's shoulder, offering her a warm, silent nod of complete reassurance. "Go home and get some sleep, Aria," Darius murmured softly, his baritone steady as a heartbeat. "You're ready." Aria looked up into her father's weathered face, her eyes softening. "Thanks, Dad. Don't stay up too late fixing their machines." "I won't," Darius replied. After Aria departed through the main hangar exits, the quiet returned, heavy and thick. Darius returned to his tool cart, picking up his diagnostic tablet and connecting a hardline fiber optic cable directly into Ford's primary flight computer terminal beneath the motion platform. He wasn't just checking hydraulic fluid. His eyes, trained over 20 years of military flight testing, scanned the raw digital telemetry streams scrolling across his screen. As Sterling sat inside the cockpit setting up Julian's practice run, Darius's fingers flew across his maintenance console with lightning speed. He accessed the system's deep kernel logs, a hidden diagnostic layer that standard line technicians didn't even know existed. What he saw made his jaw tighten into hard iron. On the route flight control menu, an unauthorized manual override had been executed 5 minutes prior under Captain Sterling's master administrator key. Sterling hadn't just cleared the weather for his son, he had secretly accessed Cadet Aria Vance's assigned test flight profile for the following morning. Deep within the software parameters for Aria's check ride, Sterling had programmed a disguised, malicious glitch. A sudden, unannounced 45-knot severe microburst, coupled with a total asymmetric engine failure at 300 feet above ground level on final approach parameters far exceeding standard FAA testing limits, designed specifically to guarantee an unrecoverable stall and force a catastrophic failure on her permanent record. Darius's breath slowed. Cold, lethal focus settled into his chest, the exact same ice-cold clarity that took over when he piloted battle-damaged gunships through mountain passes under heavy anti-aircraft fire. Sterling was planning to sabotage Aria's career before it even started, all to ensure his own son claimed the top airline recruitment slot. He thinks he's playing with a digital toy, Darius thought, his dark eyes reflecting the green telemetry code streaming down his monitor. He doesn't realize he's messing with a master. Darius didn't erase the sabotage code immediately. Doing so would alert Sterling, allowing the corrupt evaluator to invent another excuse to disqualify Aria. Instead, Darius activated his personal encrypted military bypass routine, a piece of custom code he had developed decades ago for Air Force flight simulators. With a few subtle strokes on his pad, he isolated Sterling's tampered microburst script and embedded a hidden, subroutine countermeasure linked to Aria's pilot ID. If Sterling triggered the fake wind shear disaster tomorrow, the system would automatically route control feedback directly into the dynamic force feedback yoke, allowing a pilot with true, natural instincts to ride the thermal turbulence rather than fight it. Above him, the hydraulic actuators of Bay 4 groaned as Sterling initiated Julian's clear sky practice run. Darius slowly disconnected his fiber optic cable, wiped down his diagnostic tablet, and packed his tools neatly into his steel briefcase. He looked up at the glowing cockpit dome of the simulator, his face carved of unyielding granite. "You want to test my daughter in the storm, Sterling?" Darius whispered into the empty, echoing hangar. "Tomorrow, you're going to see how a Vance flies." Chapter 2, The Shearing Wang Wind, Part 1. The sabotage check ride at 07:45 hours the following morning. The sun rose over the tarmac of the Aerotech National Aviation Academy, casting long, amber shadows across frost rows of twin-engine training aircraft and commercial airliners parked outside. Inside the primary evaluation bay, the atmosphere was tense and suffocating. The three-story observation gallery overlooking Simulator Bay 4 was packed. Members of the National Aviation Examination Board, airline recruitment representatives, and senior academy staff sat behind a long glass window, observing the final simulator check rides on high-definition telemetry monitors. Standing near the main console on the observation deck, looking resplendent in his crisp four-stripe captain's uniform, was Chief Evaluator Victor Sterling. Beside him sat his son, Julian, who had just completed his check ride 30 minutes prior under a pristine, artificially smooth sky profile, earning an unearned near-perfect score of 98%. Down on the simulator platform, wearing her polished black shoes, navy trousers, and white pilot shirt with gold cadet shoulder boards, was Aria Vance. Aria sat in the left seat, the captain's chair inside the enclosed cockpit of the multi-million-dollar simulator. She wore her aviation headset over her dark hair, her fingers performing pre-flight checklist sweeps across the overhead panel with calm, rhythmic precision. In the right seat sat Captain Reynolds, a veteran board evaluator acting as her copilot for the test. "Pre-flight setup complete, Captain," Aria spoke into her boom mic, her voice crystal clear over the intercom, requesting clearance to initialize final approach simulation into Chicago O'Hare under marginal VFR conditions. Up in the observation deck, Sterling picked up his master evaluator microphone, a malicious, triumphant smirk curling the edge of his mouth. "Clearance granted, Cadet Vance," Sterling announced over the speaker system. "You are initialized at 3,000 feet on a 5-mile final approach. Weather parameters set to standard autumn rain showers." Sterling leaned down to his private control touchscreen, the master evaluator panel that remained hidden from the rest of the board members. With a covert swipe of his thumb, he unlocked the unauthorized script he had planted the night before. Instead of standard rain showers, Sterling activated the extreme microburst sequence, a sudden, catastrophic wind shear dropping airspeed by 50 knots in 1.5 seconds, paired with a simulated dual-engine compressor stall at 400 feet above ground level. It was a flight scenario so violent that even seasoned airline captains would struggle to prevent a fatal crash into the runway threshold. Sterling's goal was simple: force a simulated crash, stamp fail on Aria's record, and secure his son's position as the top camp candidate for the international airline cadet scheme. Initiating approach sequence in 3, 2, 1, Sterling broadcast, pressing the execute button. Down on the main maintenance floor, 40 feet below the simulator platform, Darius Vance stood quietly near his steel tool cart. He still wore his dark gray navy blue jumpsuit with his D. Vance badge. To the board members and recruiters above, he was just the janitorial line technician on morning duty, holding a grease rag and a torque wrench. But Darius's dark eyes were locked onto the secondary telemetry diagnostic display mounted on the wall near his station. He saw the sudden, abnormal spike in computer processing load as Sterling's sabotage script launched. Darius didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He stood like a pillar of solid granite, his hands resting calmly on the steel frame of his cart, watching his daughter take on the storm. Trust your hands, Darius thought silently, his military battle instincts thrumming through his veins. Feel the air, not the instruments. Inside the simulator cockpit, the peaceful hum of the engines was violently shattered. Bam! The hydraulic actuators beneath the cockpit slammed violently to their mechanical limits. The visual display outside the cockpit windows turned from light gray rain to a dark, chaotic wall of whiteout turbulence. The primary flight display screens flickered red, flashing warning lights blinding the cockpit. Airspeed low, wind shear, engine 1 stall, engine 2 failure. The simulator plunged violently, tilting 40 degrees to the left as simulated downdrafts of 60 knots hammered the nose down toward the runway lights appearing through the fog. What the hell? Captain Reynolds, the veteran copilot, gasped, his hands flying to grab the emergency panel as his harness dug sharply into his shoulders. We've got a microburst and dual flame out at 400 feet. My control cadet. Disengage. We can't save this. Negative, Captain. Aria's voice rang out not with panic, but with absolute, fierce authority that echoed her father's legendary military tone. I have control. Her hands slammed onto the dual yokes. Instead of pulling back in a panic which would have instantly stalled the wings and sent the plane spinning into ground area, pushed the control column forward, pitching the nose down into the dive to gain precious airspeed. Up in the observation gallery, the board members gasped, leaning forward in their leather seats. What is that wind shear profile? One senior director shouted, pointing at the telemetry screen. That's a Class 5 microburst. Who loaded those parameters into a cadet check ride? Sterling's face paled slightly, but he quickly faked a grave expression. It must be an unexpected software glitch. I'll terminate the simulation. Do not touch that terminal, the director barked. Look at her telemetry. On the control screen, the custom countermeasure code Darius had secretly embedded the night before activated seamlessly behind the scenes. It neutralized the artificial computer latency Sterling had built in, giving Aria 100% direct, uninhibited force feedback from the aerodynamic surfaces. Aria felt the plane through the yoke in her palms. She could feel the precise microsecond the air began to grip the wings again. At 150 feet above the ground, with zero engine power, Aria executed a flawless dead stick flare. She leveled the wings with precise, microscopic rudder's inputs, catching the updraft off the runway threshold, and floated the heavy aircraft through the rain. Thud-thud. The simulator's hydraulic legs settled with a soft, perfect cushion. The main landing gear touched down dead center on the runway center line. The nose wheel settled smoothly 3 seconds later. The aircraft rolled to a complete, safe stop at the end of the runway, surrounded by simulated smoke and rain. Inside the cockpit, total silence fell save for the soft, ticking cool-down of the simulated turbines. Copilot Captain Reynolds sat frozen in his seat, his mouth wide open, staring at the 22-year-old cadet beside him. Up in the gallery, the digital score monitor calculated the flight parameters, flight path retention, and emergency control response. The red numbers flashed, recalibrated, and locked in flight score. 100%, perfect, PECT, execution under extreme emergency. The entire observation gallery erupted into wild, thunderous applause. Board members stood up, cheering and shaking their heads in sheer disbelief at the most extraordinary emergency landing ever recorded in the Academy's 50-year history. Sterling stood frozen behind his console, his jaw slack, his face completely drained of color. Down on the maintenance floor, Darius Vance slowly folded his grease rag, set it into his toolbox, and looked up at the gallery through the glass window. His eyes locked directly onto Sterling's trembling face. The applause inside the observation gallery had barely begun to subside when the senior board chairman, a stern-faced former civil aviation commissioner named Henderson, turned his sharp gaze away from the multi-monitor display and fixed it entirely on Captain Victor Sterling. Captain Sterling. Chairman Henderson's voice cut through the murmurs of the room like a cold blade. Explain how a Class 5 microburst profile and a dual-engine flameout sequence was injected into a standard cadet check ride database without prior board authorization. Sterling's face drained of color, leaving a sickly, greenish hue beneath his polished skin. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust, as he clutched his clipboard like a drowning man holding a piece of driftwood. It must have been a system anomaly, Mr. Chairman, Sterling stammered, his voice cracking with unmasked panic. A corrupted telemetry packet from last night's maintenance cycle. The diagnostic software must have misread the environmental variables. The diagnostic logs don't lie, Captain, interrupted the head of technical compliance, pointing a finger at the master console screen. The kernel override was executed precisely at 7:42 a.m. using a Level 4 Master Administrative Security key. And there is only one key holder authorized to unlock that layer on the morning of a final evaluation. The compliance officer tapped a key, bringing up the biometric login stamp on the big screen. ID V Sterling Admin No 1. The room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. The airline recruiters sitting in the back row exchanged sharp, disapproving glances, whispering among themselves as they jotted down notes in their portfolios. Julian, standing near the back, shrank back against the wall, trying desperately to make himself invisible. You deliberately sabotaged a cadet's examination, Chairman Henderson said, his voice dropping into a low, thunderous register of pure fury. You risked a simulated, multi-million-dollar hull loss and attempted to fraudulently manipulate recruitment rankings to favor your own flesh and blood. Sir, please let me explain, Sterling pleaded, taking a desperate step forward, his hands trembling violently. Save your explanations for the Academy Disciplinary Committee and the Federal Aviation Ethics Board, Henderson commanded, raising his hand. You are stripped of your evaluative credentials, suspended immediately pending a criminal fraud investigation, and barred from all aviation facilities effective this second. Two Academy security officers stepped forward from the back of the gallery, their boots clicking sharply against the floor. They moved directly to Sterling's sides, their hands resting firmly on their belts. Step aside, Captain, the lead officer instructed coldly. Defeated, broken, and utterly disgraced, Sterling hung his head. Without a single word left to defend himself, he allowed the guards to escort him out of the gallery, his once proud captain's posture completely collapsed. Julian slunk out right behind his father, humiliated before the entire industry. Down on the main simulator floor, the heavy hydraulic exit hatch opened with a hiss. Aria Vance stepped out onto the metal platform, removing her headset and smoothing down her pilot uniform. Her face was flushed with the adrenaline of the flight, but her eyes shone with an unshakable, brilliant light. As she walked toward the gallery stairs to rejoin the board, the heavy steel doors at the opposite end of the hangar opened. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark gray maintenance jumpsuit walked slowly across the polished concrete floor. It was Darius Vance. He carried his heavy steel tool case in one hand, his stride steady, measured, and unhurried. He didn't wear pilot stripes or gold epaulets. He wore no medals, no ribbons, and no executive suit. But as he approached the base of the observation stairs, every single senior board member, aviation director, and airline recruiter turned to look at him. Chairman Henderson stood up from his leather chair, walked to the glass railing of the observation deck, and looked down at the maintenance technician. Something in the man's towering posture, the quiet dignity in his dark eyes, and the sheer legendary precision of the countermeasure code that had saved the simulator recognized an unmistakable presence. Wait, Henderson whispered aloud, his eyes widening slightly as memory bridged the gap. He leaned over the railing. Good God, Chief Master Sergeant Vance. The entire gallery went dead silent once more. Darius paused at the foot of the stairs. He looked up, meeting Henderson's gaze with calm, steady composure. 20 years ago, Henderson had served as a logistics coordinator when Darius commanded the elite military transport and tactical extraction wing during the global relief campaigns. Darius gave a single, subtle nod of his head, a silent acknowledgement that told Henderson everything he needed to know, and everything that must remain unsaid. Henderson's face filled with profound, instantaneous respect. Without hesitation, the former commissioner brought his right hand up to his brow in a crisp, formal military salute. Behind him, every single aviation director, board member, and airline recruiter stood up in unison, following the chair. Aria reached the top of the stairs, turning in surprise as she saw the room standing at attention for her father. She looked up at Darius, her heart swelling with an overwhelming tide of emotion as the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. You knew about the override last night, didn't you, Dad? Aria asked softly, a warm, proud smile breaking through her lips as a tear slipped down her cheek. Darius walked up the final step, setting his tool case down gently on the floor. He reached out his large, calloused hand resting gently on his daughter's gold-epauleted shoulder, his dark eyes brimming with infinite pride. I told you, Aria, Darius said, his deep baritone warm and steady as the morning sun. You know how to fly. My job was just to make sure the sky stayed clear enough for you to reach it. Aria didn't say another word. She stepped forward and threw her arms around her father's broad chest, burying her face against his jumpsuit. Darius wrapped his strong arms around her, holding her close as the room behind them erupted into a thunderous, well-deserved ovation for a true pilot and the quiet, unbreakable father who watched over her wings. 2 hours after the disgraced Captain Sterling was led away from the simulation bay, the weather over the Aerotech National Aviation Academy took a sudden, violent turn for the worse. What had been forecasted as a mild autumn rainstorm mutated into a severe squall line. Dark, purple-black clouds rolled in from the coast, battering the glass towers of the academy with 60-knot wind gusts and sheets of torrential rain. Outside on the main runways, all commercial departures and incoming cadet flights were immediately grounded. Inside the Central Operations Control Center, red emergency beacons flickered across the primary radar displays. Chairman Henderson, surrounded by senior controllers and air traffic management staff, stood behind the master radar desk. Beside him stood Aria Vance, who had been asked to remain on the bridge following her flawless evaluation to assist with telemetry log reviews. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic warble echoed from the emergency radio console. Mayday! Mayday, mayday! A panicked voice crackled through the static speakers, distorted by heavy atmospheric interference. This is Aerotech VIP Transport 702. We have lost primary flight computer redundancy. Auto throttle is offline. We are experiencing severe microburst turbulence at 4,000 feet on vectors for runway 22 left. Chairman Henderson lunged for the microphone, his face tight with sudden dread. Flight 702. This is Aerotech Control. Report your passenger complement and status. Control, we have the Deputy Secretary of Transportation and 4 international delegates on board, the pilot screamed over the radio. Heavy thuds of severe structural flexing resonated through the transmission. Our nose gear sensor is throwing false weight-on-wheels locks. The automated fly-by-wire system is refusing manual stick inputs. We are stuck in a nose-high stall vector. A collective gasp echoed across the control room. Flight 702 was the Academy's premier Gulfstream executive jet, carrying high-ranking government officials who had been en route to inspect the national aviation facilities. Caught in the sudden squall, the aircraft's advanced computer system had suffered a dual pedot tube icing failure, miscalculating its altitude and locking the physical control surfaces to prevent a dive, unwittingly forcing the plane straight toward a lethal low-altitude aerodynamic stall. Override the flight computer from the ground tower, Henderson ordered, turning to the lead systems engineer. The engineer's fingers flew across the keyboard, his face drenched in sweat. I can't, Mr. Chairman. The onboard flight control unit is locked in an analog loop. It's rejecting ground station telemetry override. If they don't force the elevator trim manually down in the next 60 seconds, they're going to stall and crash into the eastern ridge. Tower fell into frantic, paralyzed panic. Controllers shouted conflicting emergency headings into their headsets, while outside, lightning illuminated the dark, swirling storm clouds directly over the approach path. Aria stepped toward the radar terminal, her eyes tracing the chaotic, jagged flight path of the descending VIP jet. She recognized the exact control feedback anomaly immediately. It was the exact same system lockup profile her father had taught her to override manually during her late-night hangar studies. "They're fighting the automated elevator trim," Aria spoke up, her voice sharp and steady. "They need to pull the primary flight control circuit breaker behind the captain's seat to return the yoke to direct mechanical cable drive." "We can't tell them which breaker," the lead controller yelled back frantically. "The Gulfstream G6050 panel has 48 identical breakers. If they pull the wrong one, they cut fuel to the engines." "Breaker B12, a deep, quiet baritone rumbled from the entrance of the control tower. Every head in the room spun around. Standing in the open doorway, holding his leather tool bag and a handheld radio diagnostic scanner, was Darius Vance. He still wore his navy blue technician jumpsuit, dripping rain onto the entryway mat. His broad shoulders filled the doorframe, his dark eyes locked onto the main radar screen with an unshakable, commanding calm. "Breaker B12 isolates the digital fly-by-wire computer and routes pitch authority directly to the manual elevator control cables," Darius said, stepping onto the raised control floor. His voice was low, but it possessed a quiet, hypnotic authority that instantly silenced the room. "Tell the crew to pull B12, trim nose down 3 units, and maintain 160 knots on manual throttle." The lead controller hesitated, looking at Chairman Henderson. Henderson didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. "Pass those exact instructions to Flight 702. Now!" The controller shouted into his mic. "Flight 702. Pull circuit breaker B12 immediately. Trim nose down 3 units. You are flying manual cable control." For 5 agonizing seconds, the radio produced only static. The red target dot on the radar screen flickered dangerously close to the mountain terrain boundary. Then, a sharp sollicitation resonated through the speaker, followed by the deep roar of jet engines stabilizing. "Control, breaker B12 pulled." The VIP pilot gasped, relief bursting through the radio. "Elevator authority restored. We have manuality restored. We have manual pitch control. But the storm is complete whiteout. We have 0 visual on the runway, and our instrument landing system guidance is dead." The lead engineer threw his hands up in defeat. "Without ILS guidance in this fog, they'll never find the runway center line. They'll clip the hangar roofs on short final." Darius set his heavy tool case down beside Aria's console. He picked up the master tower microphone, pressed the transmit button, and spoke directly into the sky. "Flight 702. This is Chief Master Sergeant Darius Vance." His deep voice rumbled across the radio waves, cutting through the thunderstorm like an anchor dropped into raging seas. "Listen to my voice. I am bringing you home." Inside the cockpit of Aerotech VIP Transport 702, the storm raged with terrifying ferocity. Rain rattled against the windshield like thrown gravel, and violent turbulence shook the twin-engine jet until the structural frame groaned. "Flight 702, this is Chief Master Sergeant Darius Vance. Listen to my voice. I am bringing you home." The voice coming through the pilot's headset was unlike any air traffic control transmission he had ever heard. It contained no edge of panic, no high-pitched urgency. It was a low, resonant anchor of absolute certainty that cut straight through the cockpit's screaming caution alerts. The pilot's hands trembled on the heavy control yoke. "Chief Vance, we have no ILS glide slope. Total visual blackout. We can't see the ground." Back in the elevated control tower, Darius stood tall before the primary radar console. He had bypassed the glitching digital tracking system, pulling up the raw analog radar, sweep a cathode ray display that only old-school military controllers knew how to interpret. Beside him, Aria worked the weather radar console with fluid, practiced speed, feeding her father precise wind vector updates every 3 seconds. "You don't need to see the ground, Flight 702. Darius spoke into his mic, his tone steady as iron. "I see it for you. Set pitch attitude to +2 degrees. Reduce thrust to 72% N1. You are entering the downwind leg for runway 22 left." Inside the cockpit, the pilot took a deep breath, relying entirely on the voice in his headset. He adjusted the throttles to 72% and held the pitch at 2 degrees. Instantly, the violent buffeting softened as the aircraft stabilized in the pocket of denser air. "Good." Darius's rumble echoed in the cockpit. Now, turn left heading 240. You're going to cross the river ridge. You will feel a sudden 20-knot crosswind shear from the starboard side. Do not fight it with a roll. Apply left rudder and hold your wingtip level. 4 miles away in the dark, swirling storm, the VIP jet crossed over the river ridge. Exactly as Darius predicted, a massive wall of wind slammed into the right side of the aircraft. The copilot gasped, instinctively reaching to bank the plane, but the captain held him back. No, trust the chief. Left rudder. The pilot kicked the left rudder pedal. The jet's nose swung slightly into the wind, crabbing through the air currents with astonishing stability. The dangerous stall warnings vanished from the panel. In the control tower, Chairman Henderson and the senior controllers stood in breathless awe. Darius wasn't just reading numbers from a computer screen. He was mentally flying the aircraft from 4 miles away, anticipating micro-atmospheric shifts through pure, instinctual genius honed over thousands of hours in combat skies. 3 miles out, Darius instructed softly, his dark eyes locked on the sweeping green radar line. You are descending through 800 feet. The rain will breach at 150. Stand by for visual transition. 2 miles out, Aria added crisply, her hands flying over her terminal. Wind shear velocity dropping to 12 knots, Dad. Copy that, Aria, Darius murmured into his mic. Flight 702, lower landing gear now. Flaps 30. Bring your heading left to 225 to align with the center line. Inside the fog-shrouded cockpit, the crew dropped the gear. The heavy landing gear locked into place with a mechanical thionke. 100 feet above decision height, the copilot reported, his eyes glued to the altimeter. Still no lights. Still white out. Hold your descent rate, Darius commanded, his voice filling the cockpit with total, unshakable calm. Trust the vector. 5, 4, 3, call visual. At 70 feet above the ground, the thick gray soup outside the windshield suddenly split open. Directly in front of the jet's nose, glowing bright through the heavy sheets of rain, were the green threshold lights and bright white center guide bars of runway 22 left aligned perfectly with the aircraft's nose gear. Visual runway center align, the pilot screamed into the radio, tears of pure relief springing to his eyes. We have the runway. Bring her down, Captain, Darius said softly. Welcome to Aerotech. The VIP jet floated over the threshold, flare attitude held perfectly, and touched down on the tarmac with a smooth, whisper-soft tia-dud. The thrust reversers deployed, throwing white spray 50 feet into the air as the heavy aircraft decelerated safely, rolling to a complete stop right outside the main hangar apron. Inside the control tower, total silence held for one miraculous second. Then the entire room exploded into wild, triumphant cheers. Controllers threw their headsets into the air, hugging one another in tears. Down at the apron, emergency response vehicles flashed their lights, escorting the VIP jet to the main terminal as the storm began to break, revealing patches of blue sky through the retreating storm clouds. Chairman Henderson wiped a hand over his face, his breathing heavy with overwhelming relief. He turned to Darius Vance. Darius had already unplugged his headset and hung it neatly on the console hook. He reached down, picked up his heavy steel tool briefcase, and wiped a speck of dust off his navy blue maintenance jumpsuit. Before anyone could say a word, the heavy double doors of the control tower burst open. Stepping onto the floor was a tall, distinguished man in a dark suit, flanked by 4 executive security officers. It was the Deputy Secretary of Transportation, accompanied by the Academy's president. Who was on that tower microphone? The Deputy Secretary demanded, his voice shaking with intense emotion as he looked around the room. Who guided our aircraft through that impossible storm? Chairman Henderson didn't answer with words. He simply stepped aside, extending his arm toward the tall, broad-shouldered man standing quietly near the doorway with a tool case in his hand. The Deputy Secretary walked slowly toward Darius. As he drew close, he recognized the imposing posture, the calm, dark eyes, and the absolute aura of an aviation titan. My God, the Deputy Secretary breathed, his mouth falling open in shock. Commander Darius Vance? The legendary lead instructor of the Special Tactics Air Wing? Darius offered a humble, quiet nod. Good to see you safe on the ground, Mr. Secretary. The Deputy Secretary came to attention and delivered a crisp, formal salute. You saved 6 lives today, Commander. This country owes you an unpayable debt. Darius smiled gently, placing a loving hand on Aria's shoulder as she stepped to his side. "The sky was a bit rough today, sir," Darius said softly, his deep baritone warm and unclouded. "My daughter and I were just doing our job." The torrential rain had entirely receded from the tarmac of the Aerotech National Aviation Academy, leaving behind a clear, sun-drenched horizon. The heavy storm clouds were replaced by brilliant blue skies, illuminated by the golden rays of the late morning, sun reflecting off the wet pavement. Outside the main terminal, 3 black executive Suburbans pulled onto the tarmac alongside 2 military transport vehicles. Inside the central hangar, the atmosphere of panicked crisis had dissolved into an air of profound reverence. Word of what had transpired in the control tower had swept across the entire academy complex within minutes. Flight cadets, veteran instructors, avionics engineers, and administrative staff had gathered along the interior balconies and main floor of the hangar, creating a wide corridor leading toward the entrance. Stepping out from the primary elevator bank into the sunlit hangar was General Richard Thomas, the commander of the Air Force Mobility Command, who had just landed on an emergency military flight after receiving news of the VIP transport recovery. Walking beside him was the Deputy Secretary of Transportation and Chairman Henderson. General Thomas didn't look at the multi-million-dollar simulator platforms or the sleek commercial aircraft parked in the bays. His sharp, steel-blue eyes searched the space until they settled on a tall, broad-shouldered man standing beside a mobile tool cart near the rear service bay. Darius Vance was quietly putting away his diagnostic cables and securing the latches on his heavy steel tool case. He had rolled his jumpsuit sleeves back down to his wrists, preparing to finish his morning maintenance log. Beside him stood Aria, holding her leather flight portfolio, her eyes shining with quiet, unshakable pride. General Thomas marched down the center of the hangar floor, his polished military boots clicking sharply against the concrete. As the general approached within 5 paces, he halted abruptly, brought his heels together with precision, and snapped his right hand up to his brow in a flawless, formal military salute, a gesture of supreme honor reserved only for living legends of the Air Force. Behind him, the Deputy Secretary, Chairman Henderson, and every uniformed Air Force officer in the hangar immediately followed suit, holding a crisp salute in absolute silence. "Commander Vance," General Thomas spoke, his voice carrying the deep, booming resonance of a 4-star flag officer that echoed throughout the vast hangar. "On behalf of Department of Defense, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the United States Air Force, we offer you our highest salute." The crowd of over 300 cadets, instructors, and staff erupted into thunderous, sustained applause that shook the steel beams of the building. Darius set his tool case down on the floor. He stood tall, his 6'2" frame impeccably straight, and returned the salute with the effortless grace of a man who had dedicated 25 years of his life to the defense of the skies. "General," Darius acknowledged smoothly, stepping forward to shake the 4-star officer's hand. "Thank you. But the real credit today belongs to the pilot in the cockpit and the controller who kept the weather radar clean." He placed a proud hand on Aria's shoulder. General Thomas looked at Aria, his eyes softening into an admiring smile. "Cadet Vance, I've read your check ride telemetry report from this morning. To execute an emergency dead stick flare under a covertly injected Class 5 microburst profile is something I've only seen once before in my 40 years of service, and that was when your father landed a damaged C-17 in a hurricane 20 years ago." General Thomas reached into his formal coat pocket and pulled out a velvet-lined display box containing a gleaming gold star badge, the National Aviation Merit of Honor, alongside an official commission offering. "Effective immediately," General Thomas announced, his voice echoing clearly across the hangar. "The Aviation Board and the Federal Council are offering you a full commission as Chief Director of National Flight Safety and Evaluation. The nation needs your master leadership, Commander. The entire council is ready to reinstate your full command." The room fell into an expectant, quiet hush. The recruiters and directors watched closely, waiting to see the legendary Commander Vance return to the highest seat of power in military and civil aviation. Darius looked at the gleaming gold star in the velvet box. He thought of the decades he had spent in high-stakes tactical command centers, flying through combat zones, and living under constant operational pressure. Then he looked down at Aria, whose face was radiant with joy, her future as a premier commercial airline pilot now fully secured on her own merit. With gentle, unhurried respect, Darius reached out and closed the lid of the velvet box, pushing it back toward General Thomas with a warm, humble smile. "Thank you, General," Darius said softly, his baritone steady as iron. "That mantle belongs to the past. The skies are in better hands now." General Thomas stared down at the closed velvet box in his hands, a look of profound surprise flickering across his face before settling into deep, understanding warmth. In all his decades of service, he had rarely seen a man walk away from absolute authority, let alone a legend who had defined the very standards of military and civil flight safety. "Commander," General Thomas said softly, his voice filled with genuine wonder, "are you truly stepping back from the highest seat in aviation?" A quiet, unshakable serenity touched Darius's weathered face. He looked down at his broad, calloused hands that had held control yokes through violent mountain squalls, calibrated hydraulic systems, and pulled damaged aircraft out of fatal stalls, and then looked at Aria. "My mission has already been accomplished, General," Darius replied, his deep baritone smooth and resonant. "The sky doesn't need an old commander watching over radar screens forever. It needs young, principled pilots who know how to navigate the storm with honor." Darius gestured toward Aria, who stood tall beside him, holding her official flight evaluation portfolio with complete, dignified poise. "My daughter is the future of this industry," Darius continued softly, "and my place is right here making sure the machines are sound so her wings never fail." General Thomas looked from Darius to Aria. Slowly, a proud, approving smile spread across the four-star general's face. He snapped the mahogany box shut, tucked it into his jacket, and turned to address the chairman of the aviation board and the assembled recruitment directors. "Then let it be recorded," General Thomas declared, his voice ringing clearly across the hangar floor. "Effective immediately, the board officially ratifies Cadet Aria Vance's check ride with a historic, unprecedented 100% perfection score. She is awarded the first officer seat in the National Transatlantic Fleet." Chairman Henderson clapped his hands together, and a warm, deafening wave of applause swept through the entire hangar. Flight cadets cheered, instructors nodded in solemn respect, and senior recruiters rushed forward to shake Aria's hand. Aria's eyes shimmered with tears of boundless emotion, but her posture remained steady, proud, and true. "Thank you, General. I will carry the standard." An hour later, as the sun climbed high in the clear sky, the golden light flooded the wide concrete tarmac outside the main hangar. The black executive sedans and military vehicles had departed, leaving behind a peaceful, quiet afternoon. The air smelled of fresh rain, jet fuel, and warm asphalt. Darius stood by his steel tool cart near the service bay. He had packed away his torque wrenches, wiped down his diagnostic pads, and hung his brass maintenance key ring onto the side hook of the cart. Aria walked up beside him, having changed out of her pilot uniform into a sharp, professional jacket, her leather flight bag slung over her shoulder. She looked at her father, a soft, teasing smirk curving her lips. "So," Aria began, her dark eyes sparkling with affection, "Chief Master Sergeant Darius Vance, Special Ops Lead Commander, Flight Tactics Legend." Darius let out a low, warm chuckle that echoed pleasantly in the quiet bay. "Sounds a bit dramatic when you say it all at once, doesn't it?" "A bit?" Aria laughed, shaking her head as they began walking side by side toward the parking lot. "Dad, a four-star general literally snapped a military salute to you in front of 300 people. And all this time, you let me think you just really liked checking hydraulic fluid levels and sweeping the hangar floor after midnight." "A cockpit is just a machine, Aria," Darius said smoothly, his dark eyes twinkling with quiet humor. "Whether you're calculating wind shear vectors at 20,000 feet or checking the line pressure on a ground simulator, the discipline is exactly the same." Aria stopped on the pavement, turning to face her father. The playful humor vanished from her expression, replaced by a deep, overwhelming warmth that brought a soft tear to her eye. "You gave up the highest position in the military and civil aviation today," she said softly, "just to stay here." Darius reached out, his large, warm hand gently cupping her shoulder with the same protective strength he had given her since she was a little girl learning to ride a bicycle. "I didn't give up anything, sweetheart," Darius murmured softly, looking down into her eyes with boundless, unyielding pride. "I spent 25 years staring at instrument panels and radar screens. None of it ever came close to the honor of watching you fly." Aria smiled, stepping forward to wrap her arms tightly around her father's broad chest. Darius hugged her back, holding her safe against the cool morning breeze as the jet engines hummed peacefully in the distance. Now come on, Darius added warmly, releasing her and patting her shoulder. Let's go get some breakfast. All this flying has made me hungry, and I know a diner down the road where the coffee is hot and nobody asked to see a pilot's license. Hand in hand, father and daughter walked across the sunlit tarmac together, leaving behind the shadow of corrupt evaluators and sabotaged horizons, stepping into a brilliant, unclouded future where their wings